We are now in record mode, and let's see now. I guess we're recording. So,
Okay.
good afternoon, everyone. This is August 29th, 2020. This is the very first time that we're going to have a Zoom meeting. The subject being the Swiss cheese model applied to problems of systemic racism in American policing. And we are pleased to have here today Mr. Kenny Hargrove, a noted filmmaker from the West Coast of the United States. Coincidentally, we were classmates way back when at Princeton. So for those of you who are watching in YouTube land and beyond, yes, we have a prior history. Now, let's get into the meat of the matter. Late May 2020, George Floyd was killed by the Minneapolis police. No need to go through the details. I'm assuming we all know about that. One of the outcomes of this is there are calls around the country and around the world for addressing systemic racism, especially in policing. My background being in aviation, I've been working with a number of efforts to reduce aviation accidents over the last several decades. One of which is using some very basic systems engineering tools and system accident tools to analyze a system, figure out where the problems are, and to correct those problems. Now, prior to this meeting, everybody got sent out a document that had, amongst other things, a very simplified version of the model. And I'm going to see if I can work the magic of Zoom and share that model with you.
Okay.
You see it on the screen?
Yep.
Very good. This is the Swiss cheese model, air quotes here, which was created in part by Professor James Reason out of the United Kingdom. And basically it models system accidents as the following. First of all, you have a system, complex system, usually consisting of technologies, procedures, rules, regulations, ways of doing business. And you have people, and they play various roles in the system, sometimes directly, for example, the system designers and operators, sometimes indirectly, such as the customers of an airline or the civilians who happen to be under the legal protection, sometimes not so good protection, of law enforcement. This particular model, generic parts of it, we have these Swiss cheese slices, which represent things that can prevent bad stuff from happening. Before we describe the slices, what's the hazard? You see on the left side here, the hazard is a routine pedestrian stop. That is, a police officer or one or more police officers sees someone that they have a reasonable suspicion. But let me get the words right on that. There's a specific generic verbiage that's always used. I don't want to screw that up. They have reasonable suspicion that a person is involved in a crime or has been involved in a crime. And based on that reasonable suspicion, they may stop this person. Now, some of the more famous versions of that are stop and frisk, which was popular, still is around the country. And most notably, as far as the public is concerned, in New York City. That's evolved over the years. But one of the issues with that is that police were presumed, or at least claimed to be, disproportionately stopping people of color on the street and asking them what they're doing, etc. Criminalizing people who, for the most part, are innocent. Now, point of fact, reasonable suspicion is a very low standard. And if a police officer thinks there's reasonable suspicion of a crime, they can stop anybody for any reason at any time. Now, for those of you who do a lot of driving, if you drive at all for any period of time, you sort of get some social education over the years that, gee, you should have license and registration, proof of insurance on you at all times. And if your taillights or headlights aren't working, get them fixed. Otherwise, the cops could pull you over and hassle you. That's a given. Yeah. When it comes to pedestrian stops, that's not as a common sort of social knowledge. That is, having grown up in Texas, and you, I know, grew up in California, pedestrian activity wasn't something that people did a lot. There was a whole lot of car driving. So we grew up being smart around cars, not so smart around pedestrian stops. So when I modeled this, we have this red line, which is the path from the hazard, a routine pedestrian stop, to the bottom right, a civilian is seriously injured or killed. Now, this is, I should specify, these are civilians who have done nothing wrong, are not engaged in any crime, do not have any weapons on them, and are non-threatening when the police first stop them. And that's the situation, that's the hazard. The stop happens. The thing we want to avoid is the civilian's injury or killed. This simplified model has 4 layers of protection. We have law enforcement training. how they select officers, how they keep them trained, how they manage them in the field, how the officers on their own keep up to speed with the rules and regulations and laws that they're supposed to enforce. We have the two in the middle. In the field, when things are happening, you have the police on one side, the civilian on the other. Both the police and the civilian makes decisions and takes actions. What decisions they make, what actions they take depends on their education, their training, their common sense, their level of maturity, any number of factors. And both the police officer and the civilian could have, how should I say it, latent issues, be it racism, be it distrust of the police, whatever. But there's an interaction between the officer and the civilian. The key thing that ends up with the civilian debt in this case is the officer action. That's where the fourth layer is. Officer responses to civilian actions. Now, I'm making the assumption, pretty good assumption, that about, I don't know, 20% of the people who are walking the street right now aren't altogether there. They have anger issues, they're under the influence, they're mentally ill, they're totally racist, they're totally sexist, whatever the case may be. So one can't assume that everyone's going to act in a normal way. That is, act in a way that a reasonable person would be expected to respond, because not all people out there are reasonable. Police have an extra burden because they're supposed to be the reasonable ones. They're the ones who are supposed to be not under the influence, following rules, and exercising judgment that protects the public safety. Yet and still, we have events where people end up dead. Now, coincidentally, the document I sent out to you the other day, I finished on the 26th of August. On the 27th of August, in my hometown of San Antonio, Texas, we had this event happen. You see the police car on the top of the screen here?
Not yet.
Okay, let me see. Let me stop the share. Let me share the screen again, and I'll go to another document.
Okay.
See the police car?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay, I don't know if you heard about this, but it goes something like this. 33-year-old insurance adjuster, no criminal record, was jogging down the street in San Antonio. Somewhere in the neighborhood, there was some sort of domestic dispute. The police thought that this person fit the description. They stopped him, asked him for his ID. He refused to give it. One thing led to another. He tussles with the cops. Nobody got seriously injured, but this gentleman in the green shirt got booked in the jail. He now has 2 felony charges against him for, what was it, a felony assaulting an officer. Now,
Wow.
here is, on the right, the person who was arrested. On the left is a 2017 picture of the person the police were looking for. Now, to add insult to injury, after the innocent person was in custody, they brought out the person who was bringing the assault charge. In the field, that person said, "This is not the man who did this to me." But because of the interaction between the cops and the innocent person's in jail. He has a felony charge. He's out of jail now, but he was spending 2 nights in jail. No criminal record, no weapon. Now, I don't know if you can read this with the print. In the state of Texas, the penal code does not require that a person being detained or questioned by the police provide identifying information. That is, you can remain silent and say nothing. And that alone is not probable cause for them to arrest you because it's not against the law. Now, what exactly happened between the San Antonio police officers and this person remains to be seen. This is an unfolding situation. Got heavy media coverage in San Antonio. The mayor's on top of this. The police are running an investigation. It may take months to unravel this. It takes you only 5 seconds to realize that this is a tailor-made example of what I'm talking about. The kind of routine encounter which can go sideways, and because one side tends to have the guns, that's not the side that gets the worst end of it.
Yeah.
Now, having grown up in San Antonio, I was on the cross-country team in high school. It wasn't very good, but I've run all over the city. I've run all over the country. Heck, I've run all over the place over the last few decades. And frankly, if I were out on a run, whether it's beginning, middle, or end, my mind's in a particular place. If 2 cops said, "Sir, we'd like to question you for a minute," I'm going to be kind of upset. Now, I'm in my 60s now, so I'm not going to, haul off and say something stupid as much as I would have at 17. But I'm more inclined to hold my tongue. And also, I know a few lawyers, so if things go sideways, it's like, look, put me in handcuffs, take me to jail. We'll sort this out later, and I'll sue you for your pension. That's my attitude.
Yeah.
This 33-year-old, totally innocent guy, young career person, trying to enjoy the life he worked hard to get, and this happens. So, with that introduction, let me stop sharing this.
Okay.
Stop sharing. And I would like to have you have an opportunity to talk about what you've heard so far.
It sounds interesting. There's so many other factors though that can influence these things. A lot of times it just turns out, seeing when people just walking by situations where it just turns out that this cop suddenly decides to arrest someone. It's that usual thing of suddenly they feel disrespected, or their superior walks by and that they don't want to look bad in front of their superior, so they arrest the guy. And it happens in like half a second.
And I agree. The 4 layers I put in there, there's a whole lot more going on.
Yeah.
And one layer you can easily put in there is the presence or absence of a witness to this that is recording what's going on. In the case in San Antonio, the whole event, start to finish, took about an hour. A witness actually did about a 20-minute video of it.
Wow.
George Floyd, we had not only witness videos from around, we have body
surveillance videos
and surveillance videos. So George Floyd, there's a massive amounts of information. Yet and still, the police knew that this was going on. And it's a given that if you have a crowd of people looking at something, at least one of them is going to be recording it. Let's assume that is a given. Yet and still this goes on. But can you imagine days before Rodney King, when the chance of it being recorded was virtually zero? All kinds of nonsense probably happened.
Yeah.
But to the point of what I came to, why I did this in the first place, a system problem like this is complex, has many facets, many of which can and should be worked on. My focus is rather narrow. Having a meeting like this, discussing this situation. Fortunately, we have a live situation from a couple days ago to sort of like emphasize what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
And ask this question. What are the things that are pretty obvious that could be addressed right now? You can put it into the field in short order and have the effect of at least reducing the likelihood of a bad outcome. In my opinion, it was the part about the lack of knowledge on the part of the civilian. I grew up driving. I know how to act when I get pulled over by a cop. I've been pulled over by cops since 1975. The last time I got a ticket was 1976.
Wow.
Half the time I got pulled over between now and then, I could have gotten a ticket easily because, from the stop sign over the speed limit. The most ridiculous one was in Pleasanton, Texas, of all places. Right after my father passed away, myself and several of my cousins went down to that county where we have a family farm. We checked out the farm and we're like coming back to town. So we're basically there, settling the estate and just having our eyeballs on the family farm. Pleasant day, we weren't drinking, bright sunshine and everything. Cop pulls us over. He trots on over, young guy. He says, "Sir, you were going 38 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone." My cousins all start busting out laughing. Of course, we're all in our 50s and 60s, so we know what the deal is.
Yeah.
If we were teenagers and busted out laughing, I'm sure the cop would have had a different mindset.
Yeah.
He sees these old gray-haired people laughing at his face. They know full well, he knows full well that we know what the deal is.
Yeah.
And it ended up okay. Now, if the cop had an attitude, could he have written me a ticket for 38 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone? You betcha. But it's like, what's the likelihood I would have actually had to pay that ticket? Because there's like 6 ways from Sunday I could have fought that thing with the help of a lawyer, and I wouldn't even have to show up in the courtroom.
Yeah.
That's my attitude. So maybe I'm exuding that attitude when I'm sitting there in the car. Plus, I'm very respectful, have my license, have my registration, and proof of insurance.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I know exactly. I know how fast I was going because the speedometer's working. Yes, indeed. I'll take your word for it. I didn't disagree with him, didn't argue with him. And that's the kind of thing I've grown up with over the years.
Yeah.
But again, the average young person, heck, the average old person, if for the first time in their life a cop pulls them over on the street or in a car, how do you react?
Yeah.
So I think the area of leverage that would be high impact, low cost, easy to put into place is putting I'm in the aviation business, a checklist for the public.
Yeah.
Checklist of things you should do or think about if you're pulled over by the cops. Now, there's no rule in the checkbook or no box in the checkbook saying, feel good about the police officer. No, you can be pissed off as all you want. You can think of the cop as a this, that, and the other. All I'm saying is that, hey, here's some basic things that should be done on your side at the beginning. Can't control the cop. The cop wants to bring you in, they'll figure out a way. But if you're not goading them, if you're not giving them ammo, if you're not giving them, red meat for them to go buck wild on you, you'll be in good shape in most cases. And that's the case in most cases.
Mm.
A little bit of procedure is better than no procedure at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the other difficult part of this goes way well beyond this, is the marketing of it. As you know, in the aviation safety business, there are 10,000 ways to die. However, if you have a solution for one of those 10,000 ways, how do you get your colleagues to buy into it? How do you get the regulators to start listening to you? How do you have some street cred so that when you do open your mouth on one of these 10,000 different ways to save things, people will actually listen to you? No guarantee it'll happen, but I'll tell you this from personal experience. I'd rather have the opportunity, even if it's 30 seconds at a time, to speak to the aviation community and the general public than not have that opportunity.
No.
So one of the reasons I'm putting this together with the intent of putting it out there is, look, I got some written documents here. I've got this video. I can put it out there. When I say to other people, look, here's the idea I have. And guess what? I'm not just, here's the actual thing. What do you think? We got a meeting next week. You got some time?
Sure.
And I'm, what few media contacts I have, I'll reach out to them and say, look, we've prototyped this thing. We've had a couple of beta test type things. We want to have an opportunity to have members of the public who are concerned about this talk about this. And hey, maybe you can chime in too and see what we have to say. And this is like having a, what do they call that in marketing world? A focus group of actual people who are giving you valuable feedback on a vital issue of the day.
Okay.
So have I sold you?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely something that could help save lives. So why not?
Now, for the TV audience out there, I'm going to refer to something that you didn't see, but we saw it. A few weeks ago when we had the class of 82 Princeton Black alumni having the roundtable discussion about these issues, similar issues. One of the things that came up, I can't remember who said it, I think it was
Oh, was this the one where I invited you to?
That's right, that one.
Oh, yeah, the systemic racism one. Yeah, okay.
And Eve Lawson, who filled me in, she's lived overseas and she's worked in international organizations.
Oh,
she's
yeah.
attorney as
She
well.
was working, she was in South Africa, right, with some nonprofits?
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things she chimed up about was when it came to discussing things around race and racism, it was the elites talking to the elites. It was words to that effect. Yeah. Which, literally since we were all Princeton graduates, most of us were, 50s and 60s, mature right. in our careers, right. and who have more than the average amount of influence in whatever part of society we're in. Yeah, we're speaking to the choir.
Yeah.
So how can you go beyond speaking to the elites? Well, I was thinking of that in the back of my head when I, thought about that shutdown STEM thing that got me all ticked off. It's like, look, if I do something, right, I'm beyond the stage of marching in the streets. Done that.
Okay.
Princeton out of South Africa. Stops the connection. You remember those slogans?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, for you people out there in TV land, back in the 70s, South Africa, apartheid, investments, universities, young students full of vim and vigor, protesting, waving signs. We were part of that group. But now, I'm more of a keyboard commando. Here's something I can do that can be a permanent record that can be used by somebody else. I'm not going to make any bucks out for this, nor do I want to. But if some smart person figures out a way to make dollars off of this while doing good, doing well and doing good at the same time, all I want is a piece of the action. So, want to put that out there.
Yeah, this could be part of their diversity training.
Absolutely. I'm not going to give my opinion on diversity training, so let's move on to another subject quickly before I get in trouble.
Okay.
So the original plan was to make this, an hour or less. I don't have a running clock. I should have been doing the recording here. How long have we been talking?
I'm not sure.
I'll make
20 minutes. I don't know.
I'll make a point to have a running clock next to me next time because I want to make this under an hour because, like I said in the email, it's like, look, I want 2 hours of your time. A
Yeah.
half hour looking through the materials and reading this email, the other 90 minutes, doing this and stuff afterwards. So this is the middle
Okay.
part of that 2 hours.
Okay.
So tell me, what kind of takeaway can you take from this?
It
That's
sounds
useful.
like something,
That's useful.
huh? Because there's so many situations and so many people have been injured through all this. They're all kind of unique. I love what you're saying, just because I do ride public transit, so I see these incidents all the time. They tend to go after the person who appears to be most vulnerable, least likely to fight back. The poorest looking person, or the person who's like he just crawled out of jail or just crawled out of a trash can. And like my niece is married to someone who is stopped repeatedly just because how he looks, and he drives an old car. There's nothing he can seem to do about it. So there's some, there's a lot of stuff you can do, but some people just get stuck. Definitely a lot of good decisions you can make or better decisions you can make, but they're going after somebody.
One of the things that got me, whether you're a person who's vulnerable or not, was that the laws are so different all over the place. It's like in Texas, where I grew up, which is kind of a right-wing red state. Surprisingly, you don't have to give them your name and identification if asked for by the police.
Yeah.
Other jurisdictions, you have to give your name and address. Other jurisdictions, your name only. So it's like all over the map. It's like, well, geez, two things. A, should everybody know what the rules are where they live? Two, and here's the big one. What are some generic rules that will work wherever you are in the United States? Again, having been in the aviation business a long time, the sky really doesn't care where you are, who you are, etc. So when you put together a checklist, you're not putting together a checklist for flying over New York State versus California. It's a generic checklist.
Right.
Obviously, depending on the equipment, the weather, and other conditions, you can fiddle with a basic checklist. So we're talking here a basic checklist for being stopped by the cops. Now, this is assuming the basic checklist I have, which is simplified to the max, is assuming you haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
You're not drunk and disorderly. You're not speeding. You're not doing anything. You're totally innocent.
Yeah.
And yet you're being hassled. Frankly, even though a cop, if they have reasonable suspicion, can pat you down looking for weapons, I find that offensive and invasive. Yet that's acceptable according to the law. So one of the things is, hey, here's some things that the cop can do that will piss you off to no end, but they can do it. So I'm not saying don't get pissed off. I'm just saying don't get pissed off in front of the cop.
Right.
Here's where I can go into hanger flying stories of stupid things I did when I was a young pilot, didn't know anything. But one thing, I didn't freak out when it was happening. I waited till after I landed, maybe that night, before I started freaking out. And that's good.
Yeah.
Because freaking out in the cockpit doesn't help anyone.
No.
So, ball's in your court. Since it's a one-on-one thing, I'm open to suggestions, whatever they may be, to improve what we're doing here.
So this is for ordinary families, ordinary young people. Who is it for exactly?
Having been in the online advertising business, whoever will click on the link, basically anyone who's interested, who thinks this might be worthwhile to them, and who have a couple hours. If you fit that general bill and you behave yourself during the session, I'm all in with you. And again, doesn't matter if you contribute or not. If you just sit here quietly and watch 5 or 10 or 15 other people talk about this, that alone will have some value. And again, every last one of these, I could put these up on YouTube tomorrow, and they might have some value.
Yeah. I mean, now everyone is talking about, having the talk with their Black teenagers about interactions with police. So it could be a supplement to that.
And having a talk with some backup stuff. It's like, look, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Here's some folks who, they're not world-class leaders or anything like that, but they've been thinking about the same thing. And you know what? A quarter of what they said actually makes sense. So I'm going to share that quarter with you.
Okay. No, I think it could be helpful. And definitely something that people could have a whole conversation around. It could be all over the internet.
And again, having been in the aviation business, which is overwhelmingly right wing. That is very heavily military oriented because of the history of aviation. Very
Mhm.
much a rule based culture because of, guess what? If you don't have rules, you do this in midair.
Yeah.
So having the kind of, I wouldn't say law enforcement because I have never been in law enforcement, been in the military, but not law enforcement.
Mhm.
I'm very comfortable with a regulated environment. I'm very comfortable with knowing enough about a regulated environment to not run afoul of the regulations, which when I fly my drone, I'm always mindful of.
Mhm.
And again, I don't have to be an expert in it. I'm not a professional pilot, nor am I a professional, risk analyst when it
Mhm.
comes to police stops. But hey, some of this common sense stuff, if you go into the, anal retentive checklist mode, can help you, at
Yeah.
least for the training part of it. You took
Yeah.
driver's ed back in the day?
Way back when, yes.
Okay, not that any of us can remember that far back, but do you remember anything in driver's ed that talked to you about how to behave when police pull you over?
No. I mean, I don't recall that part of it. We were just trying to figure out how not to crash the car, really, and how to park and follow the normal street signs.
And of course, there was no formal part of society, school or whatnot, I can think of that talks to you about police in the way we've talked about police. Not as negative, not as positive, just says, hey, here's how the clock is made. Whether or
Mm-hmm.
not you agree with the concept of time is ridiculous and irrelevant because here's how the clock's made. Now that you understand it, you can use that knowledge to your advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So let me state the obvious again. We're old, older than average. I'm in denial about my age, but hey, we're not young chickens anymore. How do you approach the TikTok generation with this kind of thing?
I've never used TikTok, so I'm not the
See,
best
there's your
person
problem.
to. Yeah. Well, just trying to master Instagram at the moment. That's enough for me. Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe through the schools or through some youth-oriented program, or maybe get some rappers involved or other musicians. I don't know.
Now, I am shamelessly in favor of whatever semi-slimy marketing trick you can use to get people roped in. And one of the things that I'd love to use is the medium that is out there right now that people like to use. I'm barely cognizant of how to use YouTube. I
Mm,
can't do TikTok. I don't do Instagram. There's a lot of things I don't do.
yeah.
So one of the things I am going to try and do is when I reach out to people, I'll reach out to all kinds of people, including people I wouldn't have much to do with. For example, I
Mhm.
know a lot of lawyers. I know a lot of police officers. I don't know a lot of criminals who've been arrested.
Mm,
It'll be lovely to have someone like that, preferably someone who's not going to be spewing hate or anything, to
right.
look at it from their perspective. It's like asking them the question, if you knew this kind of thing back in the day, it might not have gotten you or kept you from being arrested, but would have made the interaction more positive.
Mm, okay. Maybe approach. I guess what do they call them? The corrections officers or the just some of the people they deal with once they're out of prison. They could probably rope some of them in to get their opinions and maybe get them involved. Maybe cut down on community service or things like that. I don't know. Parole
Now,
officers, I guess.
the other, again, easy thing I could do is putting this out there and putting links to the documentation. It's like, look, you want to rip me off and do your own version of this? Hey, here are the basic documents. Run with it. Just
Yeah,
tell me about it so I can help you out maybe.
yeah,
And
yeah.
again, if you're making some bucks, I want a piece of the action.
There you go.
I'm an altruistic man, but a practical man.
I mean, if you knew if you had links to a popular rapper and they could kind of work it into a song, that might be helpful.
I will do anything that attracts an audience. Again, like I tell people about me in aviation and media, it's like there is no audience. There is no media channel that is too small.
There you
I
go.
will talk to the tiniest media channel the same way I talk to CNN. Straight
Okay.
note chaser, facts and data, useful information. Two goals only when I go on TV or radio.
Okay.
Provide useful information and encourage people to stick around past the commercial. If I can do
Uh-huh.
those two things, I'll get invited back.
There you go. Well, I guess it's election season, so maybe there's some tie in there. You can get some of the different parties and candidates to, and maybe some of the local races to bring you in to discuss it as part of a
If
larger.
they're interested, I'm interested. But much like with plane crashes, this is a generational thing.
Yeah.
What I talked about earlier about cockpit resource management and changing the culture of the cockpit, that has taken literally generations to make happen. Recognizing the problem, coming up with ways to fix the problem, convincing people that it should be fixed, making that knowledge part of everyday training for young pilots and old pilots, making this something that's not questioned anymore. That is, you're not going to see anyone come up tomorrow and say, you know what, we shouldn't have relations in the cockpit where the most junior person can speak up if there's a danger. We should go back to the old days. No one's going to say that because there are, chapter and verse, objective information that shows with this and without this, which is better.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I love people like the ACLU and whatnot and legal entities that do this sort of thing, but they're legal entities. They look at this from a legal perspective. I'm more of a nuts and bolts, hands-on kind of guy. I like math, I like engineering and whatnot, but I also like making things happen. And I don't make things happen in the engineering world by spouting off equations all the time, although I can.
Right.
And throwing numbers out at people, although I do. But the equations and the numbers have to be in a certain context. In a place, for instance, where there's a practical problem that has to be solved, or like I told a colleague of mine today, hey, Todd, check this out, yada, yada, yada. You think they'll go for it? I say, okay, answer me one of these questions. If this were to happen, how would this increase increase pleasure or decrease pain? However you define pleasure and pain, whether it's money, whether it's convenience, whether it's time, does it increase pleasure or decrease pain? If it can't do one or the other, preferably if it doesn't do both,
right,
how are you going to convince somebody to take the time and effort to put this into play?
Okay.
So, in keeping with my promise of keeping this under a couple of hours, I'd like to say thank you very much for being here today. This has been very educational for me because,
and for me as well.
and I want this to be educational for the next group of people who come up. So, I'm going to stop recording right now.